Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next installment of Bridging the Gap. My name is Jared Jones, and today I am joined by Lisa Kirschenbauer, the founder and president of Omega Wealth Management here in Arlington, Virginia. How are you doing today, Lisa?
Doing well. I see, Jared, you've got a bit of a summer look going today.
That's right. I'm excited. It feels like officially the start of summer, at least here at the firm. So I'm excited about that. And today, heading into a holiday weekend, figured I'd wear my nice Hawaiian shirt.
There we go.
Yeah. So as the title indicates, we've launched this show to bring you a different perspective on money, markets, and life, whether it's through the lens of gender, generation, or political orientation. We hope to inform, educate, and entertain you. On today's episode, we're going to talk about 3 different topics. Lisa has some insight into what the fall might look like for all of us, at least here locally, and we can only speculate maybe on the national scale. We want to talk about the health and the economy, and you can also throw the stock market into that, the paradox that's going on between the two. It seems like if we do what's really good for the nation's health, it's going to hurt the economy. And if we do what's really good for the economy, it's going to hurt the nation's health. So that's a definite paradox we're all in right now. And last, we're going to talk about now obscure Mets baseball player is making headlines. So in the future, we'll be providing weekly updates and ideas for you to ponder and connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like button. That helps our algorithms out and promotes the show so more people can see it. And now on for today's show. So, Lisa, I think you wanted to tee up some of what's been talked about, at least here locally in Arlington, about what the fall might look like. And then we can also probably open it up to broader, beyond Arlington, what we might all expect in the fall.
Yeah, so actually I'll talk a little bit about as you said, the local area and what they're trying to figure out around schools. And I can talk about my experience with my 2 sons making different choices about schools. But what it starts to do is give you a sense of the differences between how different areas, school systems, et cetera, are dealing with. And the reason this is important isn't because I'm just sharing this with you about what's going on in my family. The reason it's important for us to start to understand what choices school districts are making, colleges and universities are making, but especially school districts are making locally, is because that's going to impact the economy. If parents are having to homeschool, they got little kids, they're not going to be able to be quite as productive perhaps as if they were back to their office working a regular schedule. And so it's something we're going to have to watch in the fall, because it's clearly not going to be uniform across all kinds of different areas. So as an example, here in Arlington City and County, because we're both a city and a county here, they're giving parents, and this is a similar thing happening in one of the counties, it's the largest school district in the country, Fairfax County, are giving families choices around what they want to do. So the idea is that you can either choose to have your kids at home, or you can choose to have your kids in school for a couple of days a week. Actually, I think in Arlington, what they're going to do is you're going to be in school for 2 days and home for 3. And so you can imagine how well that's going to work out. And then there are, I think in Fairfax, you can either choose to be in school part of the time, or you can choose to be virtual the entire time. So and that's just across, literally you can drive, 5-10 miles and you're in Fairfax County. So it's really close. And I have started thinking about how it's going to impact traffic, how it's going to impact the economy, especially for families with little kids. If you've got teenagers, they're pretty self-sufficient. There's some monitoring, but, and you could be working from home certain days and not other days. But I keep thinking, in Washington in August, traffic comes to almost a standstill. Everybody goes on vacation, there's no traffic, and then we get back to after Labor Day and things really pick up. It's not going to look anything like that this fall, because there's going to be different jurisdictions with different rules, with families commuting, not commuting. And then there is literally the economy to think about. That's one piece. So that's more local for us. Because we have the federal government, there's been more people going to work thus far, but we'll see what happens with that. So on the broader side of things, I have two teenage boys who were scheduled to go off to college, both going to schools that are on the quarter system versus semester system. One going to University of Chicago, and he's really going to go to University of Chicago. And they're implementing an approach where they're going to test everybody when they arrive, maybe get there early, quarantine everybody a little bit, but test everybody, test them periodically, quarantine those who test positive as they're at school, get them out back to their homes by before Thanksgiving, and have all of their first quarter tests done at home. And then what's not clear is when they're going back to school, but sometime in the winter, whether it's January, February, I think to be decided. So they're going to attempt at University of Chicago to have a somewhat normal year, but everybody's going to have singles, no doubles. There's going to be a lot of, virtual classes in where there's a bigger class, where it's hundreds of kids. So it'll be interesting, but they're approaching it from a very scientific standpoint and seem to have figured out. Now, the other school where my other son's going is Stanford, and they took a completely different approach, also a quarter system. They're in California, of course. And so 4 quarters, they're basically saying we'll put freshmen on campus and freshmen and sophomores on campus for first quarter, and we'll bring them back in summer of 2021. So the other 2 quarters, they're going to be virtual at home. The seniors will get to come on campus with the juniors in those in-between quarters. And so it's just a completely different approach to it. And as a result, one of my sons chose to take a gap year. So he's working on some options there. And even in California, there's a lot of different choices being made. What we're seeing is more universities and colleges choosing that go back early, get everybody off campus by Thanksgiving, and then regroup after the first of the year. Now, what's interesting, and I know, Jared, you're a big sports person, certainly college sports. What they're also trying to figure out and have begun to implement is how to get sports going for the fall. And as we've already heard, there have been a number of football teams and various other sports where they've started to go back and train and are already getting positive COVID-19 tests. And so there's a lot of thinking around, well, can we have like a football game with nobody there? Do we have the high paying customers, the ones in the boxes, the alums come, but not our students, but that's really the energy of the games. So that's really up in the air, is what's going to happen with college sports. So I don't know if you've been tracking that, Jared, and have some thoughts both on the schooling and how it's going to impact the economy as well as college sports.
Yeah, I've been trying to track a little bit of both, because I think, like you talked about, the economy really relies on having kids at school and being able to get healthy workers, people that aren't at higher risk. At least that was the idea, I think, that we all had for the fall. Let's get people that are not at high risk of contracting the disease and getting a bad virus. Let's try and get them working again. And, if schools don't reopen, that really puts a hamper. We're kind of all forced to continue doing what we've been doing at Omega here. And as we know, we've talked about on the show a lot, not every job is able to do that. What I did find interesting is earlier this week, the American Academy of Pediatrics actually came out and was pushing for school-age children to be in class physically this fall. They talked about, children don't seem to be getting the disease. They're not like getting sick with it. As more information is coming up, there seems to be some question over asymptomatic spread. So they're saying, like, it's really not completely clear if children are the germ vectors we all suspected they were. And this isn't a super like edgy institution. They're pretty conservative from what I've read. They're conservative in their advice, and they're taking a bigger picture look at the importance of having children in school, not only from the economy, but for the kids. I think my sister, for example, she teaches in Roanoke, and it's like a 100% free lunch school. So a lot of kids are in economic poverty, and they just can't teach remotely. It's impossible. Like giving the kids packets of worksheets to take home does not work. So I think there is some importance, and it's going to be interesting to see, what the nation decides as we move through this. There are pros and cons to both approaches, I think, but it definitely has an impact, and it's hard to tell right now.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we're going to have to unpack later on, too early to tell, is what's going to happen in our educational system. Our students in the United States tend to be a bit behind in certain areas with other countries. And so where does this put us? I don't know if you've noticed, but there have been a number of countries that have gotten their kids back to school in June. Well, for us in the United States, you don't go back to school in June.
Blasphemy.
Right, exactly. And so are we getting even farther behind? And then, I feel for the rising seniors who are going to have an incredibly challenging year applying to colleges without, in many cases, standardized tests as a factor, unknown how schools are going to assess who the best candidates are. So, I mean, there's that whole piece. And then are we just getting behind on the learning curve? So are we losing a year and a half, whatever? And, we haven't even started to figure that out yet.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. And you talked about the sports aspect. I have been following college football. I'm a big Virginia Tech fan, so I've been trying to pay attention to what's going on. Is there going to be college football? The latest that I've read as far as speculation is that there might not be any out-of-conference games, but they will move ahead with playing in-conference games. So your school, Stanford, might only be playing Pac-12 games, and Virginia Tech might only be playing ACC games. And if I can get that, I would be happy. But yeah, it's going to be. I think I've heard from at least emails from Virginia Tech athletics that they're waiting for the state to give guidelines on what they can do with attendance at the games. But it's a huge revenue maker for the sport, and most athletic departments are separate from the university, and they really rely on this kind of income from ticket sales and people being at the games and concessions. I think they can take loans from the school, but like we know also, schools are going to be in an interesting economic conundrum too, with having to go online, less students on campus, perhaps. I know a lot of institutions make good money from those meal plans. So the kids not using the meal plans, how's that going to impact the overall budget? It's just really a big question. I'm glad I'm not having to make these decisions.
Yeah, and the other thing that you bring up, a couple of other thoughts is having been on a call with some folks from Stanford recently, talking about fundraising and updates about the university and fundraising and all that kind of stuff, is there will be no breaks in tuition for virtual as far as they're concerned. And they're not the only one. I've heard this from other universities as well. There's not going to be a discount for the fact that you're virtual. They feel that, you're still getting the same quality of education. Now, I think it's fair to say most of us would beg to differ that if you're losing that, the interaction with the professors, because the professors are in a part of the population that is, more vulnerable. And so they only want to teach remotely. It's just not the same. In the interaction with students, it's not the same. The piece on the college athletics, what we need to remember is, I think that the TV revenues are going to be okay if they can at least play games. But obviously figuring out the national championship. And then the key is that many other smaller sports within a university's sports system rely on the TV revenues and the football revenues. And so if they don't have that, what's going to happen to other college sports that are dependent on the success of their school's football revenue? So
absolutely, yeah.
Who knows?
The English Premier League soccer has started up. I don't know if you've seen any of that, but it's kind of interesting what they're doing. Stands are empty, but they're piping in crowd noise, and like a big part of soccer is the singing and the chants they all do. So it's kind of bizarre to hear them see that with like an empty stadium, but they're still getting chants through. It's kind of funny.
Yep, lots to think about on a whole bunch of fronts, and I think that tees up really well sort of this conundrum, this paradox between the economy and health decisions we're making. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this morning, I think when I was scrolling through my newsfeed on my phone, a perfect summary is that on one side of the page was U.S. hits all-time high coronavirus cases in a day, and on the right-hand side was unemployment numbers at lowest since the pandemic began. We're at 11.1%. So that really, I think, summarized what I've been feeling like is if we sacrifice the nation's health for the economy, the health numbers are going to get bad. But if we sacrifice the economy for the health of the nation, the economy isn't going to be really good. And trying to stay away from a political debate because this is fraught with political perils right now. We do know that as the economy worsens, as people experience unemployment, that does have an impact on the suicide rate amongst particularly middle-aged white men. So we know that's a factor, and it's going to be a tough. And I feel like we've just botched this from the get-go with testing and not wearing masks. It seems pretty clear to me, and I know it's political, but it seems pretty clear to me that, wearing a mask, it might not eliminate all the risk involved with going out, but if it's 30-40% of it goes down, that seems worth it if everyone's wearing a mask. So that's my soapbox on the issue.
It's a tough issue, and it's really hard to thread the needle because we're so spread out, and we have 50 states plus territories and the district and all that. Unlike when we try to compare ourselves to the European countries, their graphs go down like this, and as theirs was going down, ours is doing this. To be fair, it was much easier, I think, for them to manage the lockdown, stayed in it longer, made different decisions, were much stricter on the lockdown, I think, than even any of our states who were strict about it were. And, I think the great example is looking at California. I mean, they were really early in locking down, seemed to have it all taking, really had it under control. And now, in various parts of the state, I mean, they are really struggling at this point as far as capacity in hospitals and all that. They're basically like a small country, or actually a fairly big country.
They're like a European country, yeah.
Exactly. And that we don't have it together. And, I think the challenge is that we needed probably some more national policy than we got. And now we're again left with, to your point about the paradox, we're left with this conundrum between that some states are doing better. Like when you look at the maps, the Northeast is doing better, although that seems to be changing a little bit. I'm seeing more like red in, creeping up to our area. We're still one of the ones that's doing better, right?
Yeah.
But it's really just not going well. And I'm about to get on in the car and do a little traveling, and it's a bit of a crapshoot, knowing where you can go at this point. And that's a whole other thing, by the way, is I was just reading an article today that a lot of American workers aren't taking vacations. There's nowhere to go. They don't know where to go. Some of the places we were thinking about going in the United States are peaking. It's a challenge.
Yeah, I think the CEO of Airbnb I saw did an interview with Axios. I want to say, I'll try and link to it in the show notes. But he was saying travel is going to look completely different. International travel is just flat right now. Nobody's traveling internationally, but they're seeing that domestically, at least previously, they had saw a rebound to normal levels, domestic travel. So he was speculating that travel to national parks, most people live within 200 miles of a national park, that might see an uptick in people visiting those. I'm going to head to the beach. Hopefully that's
fingers crossed.
Hopefully that works out. But I feel like the beach is safe as long as I'm not, right up on somebody. I think it depends on how crowded the beach is. It's going to be interesting, and obviously air travel is going to suffer as well. And business travel, we've talked about postponing some business travel from the spring, but obviously I think a lot of companies are just saying we're not going to do it. We're not going to put our people at risk for business travel. So
yeah, what's fascinating to me, because I'm a pretty big travel bug, just watching the airlines play this out. It started out they were trying to keep the middle seats open, and then that, I forgot who did it first, got rid of it. United never kept the middle seats open, and they have a new CEO in place. And his feeling is, well, you know what? having middle seats isn't the answer. Having a good filtration system, cleaning the planes really well, and everybody wearing masks is as good as we're going to do. They're in a big crunch. I mean, they're not back to, it will
Yeah.
probably be a couple of years at least before they're back to full capacity. And they're running up against this deadline with the government, where they took aid from the government, and they've got to maintain their employees or level of employment through the end of September. It was just in the paper again today. You watch October 1st, if not sooner. And again, United's already announced layoffs in October. You're going to see a bunch of layoffs from the airlines. And yet I'm thinking, how is that going to help service, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see what the government does, because I think it's pretty clear that the $600 unemployment checks have helped people. But it's an election year. There will be yelling on both sides of the aisle about what to do next. And if we want to really, get the health on track, which should trickle over to the economy side of the conversation eventually, then I feel like we just got to bite the bullet and keep these programs going. Maybe they decrease them, but it seems like we got to put out the fire. Right.
Yeah, and at some point we'll talk about, we can revisit some of the business stuff. I was reading today that I think the government realizes that they are going to have to provide more support to small businesses. It may be much more targeted than the PPP, the Main Street program, all of that kind of stuff was initially, that they'll try to see if they may need to focus it in industries or a certain level of business or a certain kind of business. But there's definitely going to need to be some more help. Even just because they've extended how long you can apply for PPP, Paycheck Protection Program money, a lot of, I think, the companies who can and want to get it have already taken it. They've already spent it. So it's going to be interesting this summer to see, I think, how some of these aspects play out. We'll be watching corporate earnings, I think, too. That's going to be another factor in the stock market. Then looking at what happens with schools as we approach the fall, and how companies are going to and how workers and the economy is going to recover depending on what the school situation is. So I think there's going to be milestones along the way over the next probably 3 to 6 months that we'll need to be watching, that will impact health decisions, economic decisions, and market impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that's interesting because of this paradox, maybe we talk about it on a later show, but parts of the economy are in a depression, and then other parts of the economy are in a raging bull market right now.
Yep.
Particularly like e-commerce is seeing a huge uptick in the companies associated with that. So it's just, there's paradox and conundrums everywhere.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say about the e-commerce, or just to use like FedEx for an example, I mean, they're running full speed trying to deliver stuff. What they did say is that their margins are really tight. So I think if you're in e-commerce, yeah, you've got revenue coming in, but my guess is your margins are tighter than ever, just because of capacity issues. You've probably got issues with health in your employees. You needing to, social distancing, all of those precautions. So it is a paradox, and it's such a great example to me as the leader of Omega, of what to do and not do as a leader. Without getting into the political side of it, I would just say that for any business owner, for any leader of an organization, the United States and how we have responded, or how we've at various times dealt with things, is such a great example, sometimes of what to do, many times of what not to do. And hopefully we can all learn from that as we move forward.
Yep, well said. All comes down to leadership, and you can see good leaders and bad leaders through all this. So
yep.
I think the last thing we wanted to talk about today, we're talking enough about coronavirus and the economy. Let's wrap things up with something fun. So yesterday I was on the internet and saw that July 1st is Bobby Bonilla Day. And I was like, who is Bobby Bonilla? So I looked up who he was. He's a 57-year-old former MLB baseball player who spent a good portion of his career with the Mets. And back in 2000, The Mets made a decision to buy out his contract, which I believe would have been worth about 11 point something million dollars, somewhere in the $11 million range. And rather than paying him the $11 million to buy out the remaining part of his contract, they made an agreement with him to defer the compensation until 2011. They were going to pay him like 1.25 million a year with a guaranteed interest rate of return of 8% until
Wow.
2035 or 2035. And I was like, whoa, how did they come up with this? Reading further, they were working with Bernie Madoff and his Ponzi scheme. Obviously, they were seeing some good returns from the money they had with him. So 8% sounded like nothing, I guess. Who knows? But, here's Bobby Bonilla in 2020, 57. He's one of the highest skilled players on the Mets baseball team right now, and he doesn't even play an inning for them. So I just thought that was fun. I thought there were some pretty good financial planning lessons through all of that, though. One thing we always talk about is what rate of return we're assuming for clients. And here's a perfect example, right? Like 8% rate of return, way too high. Instead of the $11 million he's owed, he's going to be paid, I think, 29 some million dollars over the course of this.
Crazy.
So yeah, there's some good lessons there, and also just the benefits of, I think, deferring some of the money owed to you. We work with a couple clients who have deferred compensation packages, and there's benefits there as well. So there's some good financial planning and all of that.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's funny to me because the whole Madoff legacy lives on, and the ties to Madoff and that whole transaction continue to play themselves out and serve as an example of what not to do.
Absolutely. And I was thinking, if you're the Mets, this is like a 35-year mortgage at an 8% interest rate, and I doubt Bobby Bonilla wants to refinance this.
Yeah, he's laughing all the way to the bank each year. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, great. So I think that's a good place to wrap things up. We're heading into the 4th of July weekend. We hope everybody has a great Independence Day. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next week.
Take care. Be well.
All right. Bye.